Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with another Diablo 4 build guide, and this time we're going to talk about the Shadow Blight Necromancer. This is a variation of my Shadow Sever Necromancer build, which are all the guides are listed in the descriptions down below. Before we go into the gameplay footage, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the build, the powers, the items, and stuff like that. And keep in mind that the guide for this build will be linked in the descriptions below, and sometimes I'm making changes to my guides. It happens quite often here and there. And that means that this video might be outdated. So if you want to make sure you have the most updated information, make sure you check out the written guide linked in the descriptions below. Also, you know, the YouTube algorithm, all that jazz. Apparently, people don't sub unless I tell them to. So if you like this video, hit the sub button, please. Just like the video, sub, leave a comment down below. It supports the channel a lot. Anyways, so this build is a blight-focused approach to the Shadow style. Now, you can level with this. However, I think that Sever feels a bit better to level with. I like this because it's consistent damage and provides a lot of control. It doesn't do well in party because of the lack of consistent instantaneous applied damage output, so I would recommend this more of a solo approach. And I will not also be going through the Paragon board too much in depth here, but I will mention this. We are running a Wither board, and we're also going in for a Bloodbath board, and that is because of a blood drinker, so that we can get fortification from blood orbs. This is very important for defensive layers in the higher nightmare dungeons. And then we're coupling that with a flesh eater board. There's more information about the Paragon boards in detail in the written description, in the written build guide in the descriptions down below. The most important glyph is a control glyph though, and in this build I actually do have a level 21 control glyph. The rest of my glyphs are very low level, as you might see here. So it's again a little bit behind in terms of power, and my gear is not optimized, but I'll talk about the gear here real quick. Gear and power for this specific build before we talk about the skill tree is that we're going to run an embalmer. Now, this is very, very important for the build to be able to generate blood orbs, just for the sake of having more corpses to play with for our damage output, but also the idea of getting the blood orbs for fortification. Now, the item modifiers, the item's modifier priorities would be that you want to actually have a life roll, armor, intelligence, and attack speed. In our case, we only have 2 of those modifiers, which is armor and life. So again, our gear is a little bit subpar. The power is embalmer, and that's what I would put on the helmet with this build. Chest piece wise, disobedience to stack the armor. I only have a 45% roll. It's okay. You can get it a little bit better. Stat priority would be damage reduction. Crowd control reduction timer is very good. Not necessarily needed, as we have a backup of blood mist, which allows you to have another layer of damage reduction if you go for that instead. And then obviously go for life if you can. But mostly I would literally just stack damage reduction. In our case, we only have 2 of those modifiers. The other 2 are completely irrelevant, more or less. So it's a little bit so-so. Glove-wise, we are going to be using Howl from Below. This allows our corpse explosions to turn into a mobile skeleton that will run at the enemies and explode, and leave the miasma corpse explosion effect on where they exploded. Obviously, as you can see here, they're very bad rolled. However, these are rather common uniques, but the build does orient around this approach, so you can play it without it, but it will be a little bit more harder to navigate your clearing, as you have to make sure the enemies are inside your pools, whereas Howl from Below allows your damage to be running at where the enemies are, rather than trying to create new corpses where they are at and then do the damage. We are going to be using Temerity. This is a really nice layer of defense when it comes to barrier. The solution to run this for the idea of creating barrier without Temerity would be to run the aspect of shielding storm. Now, this obviously emphasizes on the approach that you actually have to spec into shielding the bone storm, which would replace the blood mist, and that would increase the attractiveness of having a modifier in your chest, such as the reduced crowd control reduction timer, and that would be the solution to that. However, Temerity is really nice for the barrier, which is going to be very well coupled with the damage with Fortify, through us having Fortify being behind the layers of barrier covering our defenses. On the boots, we're using the Bone Weave, which is the Void approach here. The Blight will pull enemies, and since this build is focusing on doing damage with the Blight, enemy packs will cluster up, and then they're going to be moved like from side to side, basically. It's going to look really weird, and that's because we're spamming Blight, because we're going to have so much essence with this build, it's insane. Modifiers on the boots should be double movement speed to make the wheelchair a little fancier, because the Necromancer is so slow, and that is having movement speed generically and movement speed when we kill an elite. It helps to build out quite a lot. On the boots, we would like to have other modifiers as well, in the form of level of corpse tendrils, which we do have in this case, and we also want intelligence or armor. In this case, we have willpower. Not the best, but again, it's not perfect, but it's still good. We're going to use Bloodless Scream. You could use a two-handed scythe instead. It's for the life on kill implicit and high-end damage. The Bloodless Scream allows us to apply darkness skills, providing chill, which will stagger a lot. This will slow enemies down, make the build feel a little bit safer when you have this item. It also allows you to stagger enemy bosses much easier with this approach as well. But using a two-handed rare scythe is more than fine until you get one. Amulet-wise, we're going to be running double movement speed. As you see here in-game, I only have one movement speed modifier, so not the best. Cooldown reduction is an attractive modifier if you go for the Bone Storm approach without Temerity. We don't have that. In this case, my Amulet should be having two movement speed modifiers. Level of Terror. You can also run Level of Amplify. Gloom, Fueled by Death would work really well. Also, Darkness skill damage works fine, or damage to close enemies, and all those modifiers will also be attractive in the slot. The power is of the Damned. This makes it so that enemies that are cursed by both Decrepify and Iron Maiden will be taking a multiplicative increased damage, which is why we have this on our amulet, scaling this significantly. If you're using a two-handed rare weapon, put this power on the weapon. It's just absolutely disgusting with what you can achieve with that, and that is possible to put on a weapon. I had to double check. Then the next step is the Loop of Decay, which is a ring. In this case, the power gives us the Shadow Blight key passive. Will be doing extra damage and increase the damage when it's stacking up to 5 times and within the 10 seconds. We're going to be stacking a ton of damage over time effects, and this is our single target damage scaler. There is one that's stronger than this, but that's only worth it versus high-end game bosses like Uber Lilith or World bosses, and it's completely irrelevant for the rest of the game, so this is the best power to use instead. Modifier-wise, we'd be looking for Vuln damage, damage over time, shadow damage, close enemies, such as what I have on this ring, is a perfect example of 4 modifiers that would work well. Slowed enemies, close enemies, damage against affected by shadow damage over time enemies. However, I would recommend actually prioritizing a life modifier on your rings as well, which I don't have. The other ring is using an Umbral. This is something you can pick up from the Codex from a dungeon, but if you drop one, you can get it stronger. But again, you don't actually need more than that. This is a very effective way for us to get a ton of essence. I got a fucking cat hair in my nose. Holy fuck, man. Ah. Alright. Fucking hell. So, let's move on to the skill tree. Skill tree. We are going to pick whatever 2 points in our basic. We're not going to use a basic skill. So whatever points there just to progress. Maxing out Blight. Picking up the Supernatural to make us provide 15% multiplicative damage approach to it. You could run the Immobilize. I'd prefer this for damage outputs. We're going to generate corpses, so Hued Flesh is very important. Value point of Blood Mist unless you're going for the Bone Storm. If you are going for Bone Storm, you're going to have to cut out points from elsewhere. We are then putting 1 point of Corpse Explosion into the Blighted version. This is our main source of damage output outside of the Blight, and this is also going to tick for 12 times over 6 seconds. That's 2 hits per second, and each hit generates a possibility of a lucky hit, which can generate a corpse. And that same thing goes to Blight. This is how we're going to stack a ton of hits per second, which all works really well with the Shadow Blight key passive as well. And it's just really, really nice in that sense. Grim Harvest, every time we consume a corpse, gives us an essence. We're running Fueled by Death to give 9% multiplicative damage increase every time we consume a corpse. We're running 1 point in Iron Maiden into the Abhorrent Iron Maiden for the heal. The reason for this is that if we ever run out of essence, we can curse with this to give us essence back, but that should never be an issue. But this here is really good with the Temerity to allow us to get extra layers of barrier between packs, but also the Damned Curse, or the Damned Power, allows us to benefit very much from having 2 curses in general. Amplify, since we will be cursing enemies, gives us tons of extra damage. Decrepify lowers enemy damage and lowers the cooldown of our abilities to the Abhorrent Decrepify. We're going to be running the Corpse Tendrils. This is a defensive approach. We don't really care much more about it other than that, but it is also our only way of applying Vulnerable. We'll generate corpses, we'll make the enemies vulnerable, we'll use Decrepify to lower our cooldown so we can consistently cast out the vulnerable. It's not guaranteed uptime at 100% obviously, but it's the best way we can apply vulnerable consistently on enemy targets. We're going to be running full out Reaper's Pursuit for the extra movement speed since we are in a wheelchair after all. We're going to have increased damage from Gloom as well as Terror, and then we have 1 point of Crippling Darkness. Not so much for the stun duration, it's the fact that we want this to trigger because it will make bosses stagger super fast. Since we are sacrificing all our minions, we're going to go for full out standalone as well as Memento Mori, and obviously the key passive for Shadow Blight. Now, the minions, we are sacrificing Reaper for the 15% multiplicative shadow damage increase. In the Skeleton Mages, we're dropping for the 15% increased multiplicative damage for vulnerable targets. And we're sacrificing this for HP with the Blood Golem for layers of defense. And I'm going to show you I don't know what tier this was, with the suboptimal gear, suboptimal glyph levels, except for one glyph. And we'll see how this build feels. And you'll see how the build plays out. Obviously, there's a ton to be able to be improved here, especially for damage outputs. But it's going to be fun to show this build. Make sure you run with a flask, not just for the experience, but also defensive layers or offense. In this case, I'm going to take the weakest flask to have no effect of that other than the experience. We'll do this one. And I actually haven't upgraded my flask properly, so we'll see how this goes. Right, so the gameplay is very simple. I will start by basically cursing enemies with both curses. Keep in mind that Iron Man doesn't actually cost anything, so you can spam it. The next step would be to then cast Blight in it, which will slow them down. At any given time I see corpses, I will start with Corpse Tendrils because this does not consume the corpse, but will gather enemies together with my Blight and stun them and make them vulnerable. And then I will consume the corpse with Corpse Explosion, which will give me essence back and also get those extra damage hits. And that's about it. Moving on. Let's try this out then. Oh, I don't even have extra evade on my boots. So we do curse, we do blight, we step away, and we check if we have a corpse. We do, and then we explode the corpses and more corpses. And as you can see, everything just melts. And that's basically the playstyle. And this is, like I said, subpar gearing, kind of behind in everything, to be fair. But as the enemies are just consistently getting slowed and staggered, and I can, for the most part, just sit there, ramping up my barrier, ramping up my fortification, and all of that jazz. I don't really have to... Oh, Jesus Christ. I don't really have to worry too much, unless I didn't see that my Corpse Tendrils didn't get off. You shouldn't be tanking the explosion, guys, by the way. That's why you have Blood Mist, but I haven't used it. That's a good call, actually. But as you see there, in that situation, it's a good display of me being overzealous with the tankiness. Because the thing is, you're tanky, but you should be tanky, actually. I'm not in this. So you can use your Blood Mist as a panic button, if you will. But most importantly, I'm waiting for my Corpse Tendrils to explode. But you see there, I saw the explosion. I had to step back because I already used this. It was on cooldown. I couldn't use it again. So it's all about staying safe in those situations. As you can see, I'll have my barrier up and running. Don't really have to worry too much. Get another Corpse Tendy, and we are done. There was no boss in here. And I got Blood Artisan. Really terrible rules as well. So no boss, but versus a boss, it's basically the same thing, and it's just staggering them very quickly as you just stack all of your damage up. It's literally the same thing all the time when it comes to this build. So like I mentioned before, if you did like the video, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe for more content, leave a comment down below what you think of it, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Till then, as always, stay safe, keep rocking.